Hi, it's Conkers Live. Here we go. Hi there. Oh no, that was looking so good, wasn't it? And then I went and messed it up right at the last second. But hi, welcome. We're back with Conkers Live, first time round in 2021. We've got 360 people out there already. Been watching the comments. I'm closing the comments down on my screen now. So if you make a comment in there aimed towards me, I won't be reading it because it's far too off-putting. So it's great to have you all out there, though. I see we've got loads of people from all over the world. So fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun. Happy New Year, by the way. Forgot to say that. It's not got off to the best start, let's face it. But we're here. We're having fun. And it just goes to show you can't keep a good hobby down, hopefully. And we're starting the year off with a real bang. We've got the wonderful Glenn Lucas demonstrating for us tonight, and I think we'll be bringing him on in a little while. Say hello to him in just a little while. But before I do that, I need to say a very special thank you to someone, but I don't know who is the problem. So if you've seen her on our Instagram, is it Instagram or Facebook? Facebook recently, this mysterious package arrived in the office, and didn't really know what it was. So I opened it up, and there were these 4 gorgeous pens in there. These ones here. The picture really doesn't do them justice, but they're absolutely lovely pens. No idea where they came from. Looked further into the envelope, and there's a lovely little message in there, and I won't read all of it out to you. It's not that long, but it says, "I live by myself." Someone had done the quiz and was saying thank you for the quiz, and he said how much he enjoyed it. He said, "I live by myself, and in these difficult times away from family, friends, etc., you made a very quiet evening fun and enjoyable." I was really touched. So that was absolutely unexpected, and I'm really grateful. And I don't know who's done that, so I can't actually thank them properly. I'm only hoping that they're watching tonight. So Mr. V Grateful, if you are out there, I'm very grateful as well. So thank you so much for those lovely pens, and the gesture and the thought. It means a lot to us. So thank you very, very much indeed. It really is very kind of you. So yeah, I don't know what else to say other than thank you. And I hope you enjoyed the quiz. He didn't come first, apparently, but he came halfway down the table, but that was fairly good. And we've got another quiz coming up at the end of the month. I'll be telling you about that a little bit later on. But in the meantime, let's quickly say hello to Glenn before we move on to anything else. Make sure he's all set up and ready. So, Glenn, hopefully you're there. And hi, Glenn. How you doing?
Hi, Terry. Hi, everybody. Am I coming through loud and clear?
I've got you loud and clear, absolutely. And if anyone wants to make a quick comment in the chat there, just to confirm, we got the everyone hearing Glenn okay? Just waiting for the chat to catch up.
I need to chat. Well, welcome.
I'm sure they're all hearing you.
My new workshop.
So happy New Year, Glenn.
Happy New Year, Terry.
Let's hope it's a little bit better than last year's. That was a little bit strange.
Much worse.
That's right. Glenn, we're not hearing you fantastically at the moment. Is your mic on okay?
Yeah, the mic is on. So is it coming through?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure it sounds clear.
Yeah,
but people are saying they're getting an echo. So I'm not quite sure what the echo is all about.
All right. Okay. I'm not getting an echo here. Is right. Hopefully that's cured now. There was a little bit of an echo, but I think hopefully that's gone now. So if anyone wants to tell us in the chat.
I need to point out we're in a new workshop. There is an echo actually in this room. So perhaps that's what people are hearing. I'm hoping that's rather than the echo through feedback, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a big space, and I'm hoping you'll tell us a bit more about it a bit later on.
I'd be happy to do that.
That would be fantastic, because let's hang on. I'm just going to do a little adjustment here. I don't think it's anything my end, but let's see where we go. So let's see if okay, someone's saying it's okay now. It's better than it was. Brilliant. So that's fine.
So everybody, so it seems to be good now. Everybody's saying the echo is gone. Great.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, there's feedback echo, but no, that's fine. So we were saying about last year being a bit of a washout, really. I mean, if your diary was anything like mine, you just had big red lines through the whole lot of it. I mean, you must have missed hundreds of demos or had hundreds of demos cancelled last year.
My year was completely messed up. So I had trips planned to Norway, trips planned to the USA, and to other places around the world. And in a way, it was actually nice to be home for a while, because I've spent, quite a few years just living out of a suitcase. But the fun wore off just being around very, very quickly, because as you mentioned, we're in the middle of a new construction here. We're not at the middle, we're at the end of a new construction here. So this lockdown meant we were looking at a building site with not much happening for months on end, which was rather depressing. And for quite a big chunk of the actual build or the construction, I was able to work in a temporary building because my old workshop had to be taken down. But last August, the temporary building had to be demolished as well. And that left me in limbo land for a little while. So at long last, I am in our building.
And where you are is only just a small part of it, I believe. Is that correct?
This was supposed to be the production studio initially. That was the plan. So when the classes, when the room next door is being prepared or already prepared for a class, that I could come in here and just get on with production without having to clean up the mess and get the place spotless. But this is going to be the Zoom room for the foreseeable future. And I'll do my production in the larger room next door here.
Okay, because obviously you've got that, and I say we will let you. We will get you to have a little give us a little tour later on. Sure. Lovely facility there, and of course you can't. I don't know what your restrictions are over there, but probably the same as us. You can't have anyone there. Would that be accurate?
conditions here are very severe, and I heard tonight that Ireland is among the worst in the world at the moment with our COVID cases for its population. It's really got out of control here. So we cannot travel any further than 5 kilometers at the moment unless it's for essential work. And but once I'm in here, I'm quite happy. I don't need to go too far if I can actually work, you know.
Yeah. Oh, it's a crazy situation. Well, looking forward to having a look around in a little while. So I'll let you do the last few bits, get yourself ready, and we'll come back to you in, well, gosh, 2 or 3 minutes. Well, 5 minutes, something like that. But you are going to join us on Zoom later as well for a little while, aren't you? We've done a rejig.
Happy to join on. Yeah, if people would like to join us on Zoom later on, any questions that don't get answered in the demonstration, I'm more than happy to answer them later on. And
all right, that's brilliant.
Delighted to see so many familiar faces appearing in the chat there. So thank you everybody for joining in.
It's great. Yeah, this is a great turnout. So yeah, great to have everyone there. So Glenn, I'll leave you to get yourself final preparations, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Perfect. Okay, thanks.
Cheers. That was the button I meant to hit. There we go. So we finally got there in the end. So absolutely brilliant. So yeah, great. We've got over 460 people there. So that's a really good turnout. Thanks so much for coming along and supporting us tonight. Lovely to have you out there. So a couple of quick things to mention before we go into Glenn's demo. We've been talking a lot about this new thing that we're doing. It's this. Yep, question time is coming. 22nd of January. We've got a team of 3 turners. We've got Emma Cook, we've got Richard Findlay, and we've got David Lowe, all coming on screen, ready, able, and willing to answer your questions about wood turning. So if you've got any questions, no matter how trivial you might think it is, we want them. We want to hear them. It's going to be about an hour to an hour and a half session. So we want to get as many questions in as we can. We've got a few spaces left. So if you've got a question about wood turning, technique, what tools to use, what the tools are for, what they do, anything like that, we want to hear from you. It might be you got something new for Christmas and you're not quite sure how to get the best out of it. Then, you know, this is the place to find out. We've got 3 experts there who really know their stuff, really ready to give you the answers that you need. So that's the 22nd of January. And if you haven't had enough of us by the end of the month, 30th of January, we're doing another quiz. We did think long and hard about, you know, is that too many? Is that too much chestnut in a month? But with everything else that's going on, we need some fun. We need something to look forward to. So 30th of January, about 7:30. All the details will be coming out soon. We'll be hosting another quiz, same format as before. So 36 questions, 6 rounds, 6 questions in each round. So if you don't like a round, don't worry, there's a better one coming very, very soon. If you're not getting our bulletins, if you're not getting our details, down below, down there is a link to our on our web pages, and that will take you to anywhere you want to go on our website. You can sign up for bulletins about Conkers Live, about the wood turning weekender, because one day we're going to do that again. And we can also have you can also sign up for our newsletter, and that's something we send out every week, every Friday. We take 3 questions, we answer them, and we just send it out to everyone who wants to read it. So that's another bit of fun that we do. Right, so without further ado, so I don't want to overrun time too much if I can avoid it. I think Glenn's ready there. Glenn, you ready? Give us a thumbs up if you're ready there. Yep, I'm getting a thumbs up from Glenn there. I can see him, but you can't. So we'll bring Glenn back on. Hopefully I'll get the screen share right. There we are. And he's muted at the moment. Yeah, you're unmuted, mate. So, Glenn, Perfect. If you're ready, I'll hand everything over to you.
Okay, so what I'm going to start with today is a little slideshow that I've prepared earlier on, just giving you a little tour of our new facility and also a little insight into my background. So if you bear with me, I'm going to walk out of the screen for a second and switch over. And if there's any issues with sound or anything, Terry, I'm reliant on you to help me out. So I'm going to just press play here. So this is our local area. That's Mount Leinster in County Carlow. We're in the southeast of Ireland. And that was taken on the coldest day that we've had in the past past 3 years, and a couple of days ago. But the snow is all starting to melt now at this stage. I suppose I'm best known for my production turning. I have been turning salad bowls for the past 30 years now. And I've had my own production business for about 25 of those years, producing salad bowls, supplying shops all over the world. And another big part of the business is teaching. So this is typical of my production from over the years. So supplying shops in the USA, UK, and around Europe and Ireland, and working mainly with native Irish hardwoods. So that's a batch of bowls ready to be rough shaped. All of those were cut up with the chainsaw. And that's my old studio. This is a batch that has been cored with the one-way coring system. So what you see in the picture there is about 2 days work between rough shaping and coring. So it's quite physical, but I really do enjoy immersing myself in the shavings. This one here is my wood drying kiln. And so at the moment, it's out of action, so I have to relocate that and get it powered up again. And I'm hoping to get rough shaping in the next couple of weeks. But it's a freezer body from the back of a truck. And all those bowls, the biggest there are 15 inches in diameter, smallest 12 inch, and they'll be stacked inside, and they'll take about 8 weeks to dry them out. And that is native Irish beech. I also work with ash and pretty much any of the hardwoods that I can get locally. So that is a batch of bowls. There was about 400 in total in that batch, all from flamed and spalted beech. And they went to one client in the USA who own quite a few retail outlets. And so we're moving on now to the new workshop. So that was taken about 2 days ago. And we were planning this workshop for quite some time. Our old workshop was cozy, but it was just way too small. And because I went from just being a production wood turner to also teaching at the same time, we felt very early on that we didn't have enough space. And now we have all the space we need, but we don't have the students at the moment. But we hope to get that back on track very soon. The building measures 50 feet wide and 70 feet long. And it's covered with, it's called tegral fiber cement cladding. So it's only covering the wall. Instead of plastering the wall, we covered concrete blocks with a cavity built like a house with this cladding so that it would blend in with other agricultural buildings in the area. And we have more than enough space. I'll take you on a tour on the inside now in a second. So we're really, the building is pretty much finished. There is just a small bit of snagging to do. And it's just a wonderful feeling getting into it at long last. And there's a second building there on the right-hand side. I'll give you a little view of that later on. You can see it there in the foreground right now, and that is my storage building. So there's a chimney flue coming out of it that has been extended since. That's where I burn all my offcuts. So I heat the main building with a gasification burner. And then where you see the wooden cladding in the middle, that is where I air dry my firewood. And then to the right of that is another storage building. And then we have beautiful mountain landscape pretty much all around us. We're very lucky where we live. So that's a view of the mountain side of the workshop, and that's really looking at where the large classroom is placed. We've got a covered area there as well, so when people are on a coffee break, we're going to put some benches out there, and when we're in the middle of summer and springtime and things are a bit warmer, days are a bit warmer, we can sit outside there. You'll notice also that the roof it looks like it's slanted. You can see the galvanized steel there where it slants down. And the reason for that, as the sun rises over the mountain in the morning time, you get the maximum view from the classroom without the sun blinding people standing at the lathe. You can also see on to the left there our dust extractor. So that is a 10 horsepower dust extractor, and that's capable of taking the dust away from all the lathes at once in the classroom. So it takes out the dust, it cleans the air, and then it sends it back through that square duct into the building so we don't lose out on any of the heat, which is quite precious at the moment. So we'll move on to the next image in just a second. But the construction has gone on now for roughly about 18 months. So that's a better view now of the dust extractor. So you can see the round vent on the left, that's about 12 inches in diameter. And the door at the very bottom is just a little, that's where the collection bag is. And then all these pleated filters are above that. So this is a view in the classroom. That is just before our lights were fitted on the ceiling, but so all of that is in place now. We have 8 lathes running along the wall there on the left, and then we have these flexible dust extraction arms as well, so we can get those right in where the dust is being created. A big bandsaw then to the right, it's 5.5 horsepower, 3-phase, and then my main demonstration lathe to the right. So this is the bandsaw that I have now. I replaced an older model of the same type of machine, same horsepower, with this new one. Because it's a school, it's important that the brakes and everything is working correctly on it. So I had to upgrade that. So this is a view of how the workshop looked about 2 or 3 days ago. And so we're putting up the wall panels there now. So we have areas for the tools to be stored during the class. Something similar to what I have in the room here today. And then we have a bench running along the wall as well for the tools. And it just makes it easy to clean around the floor. Teaching has been an important part of my business for the last 15 years, from both my own studio and also as I travel around teaching around the world. I've been to about 25 different countries teaching wood turning. So this is another view from the workshop. So you can see the extent of our dust extraction. It took about 5 or 6 days to install all of that extraction. It works superbly well. It's really efficient. I now have a panel saw and I have a planer thicknesser. So my early years, I trained as a furniture maker, and before I started teaching, I always had a circular saw and a planer. But as soon as the teaching started in the old workshop, those machines had to go, because I simply hadn't got the room. So it was important to me to be able to get machines like that back in action again. Not really connected with the wood turning, but I really want to make some furniture again, just as a hobby, if nothing else. This is a view now of it's both kitchen and also gallery. So when students come for a class, that table can be extended and we can feed them. And also when people call here to buy bowls or buy tools, we have a display area there. And so this is the last image now. So this is the storage building. It runs parallel to the main building. That's about 50 feet long and about 12 feet wide. And the door that you can see there straight in front, that leads into the boiler room. It works extremely well. So we have a gasification boiler, as I mentioned earlier on. It's 35 kilowatts, and it generates all the heat for this building. So the main building, it has underfloor heating as opposed to radiators. And that was one of the things that was important because of the amount of dust that we create here. And so I just light that in the morning. I fill it once with just Irish hardwoods, and then let it go out itself. I don't have to keep refilling it during the day, so it just works superbly for what we're doing. So I'm going to get you back here for a moment, and I'm going to just get my glass of water. And if you have any questions about that setup, I can talk to you later on in Zoom about it. So I'm just going to take a little sip of water. So there's a question just came in. Just to mention, in the background here, my wife Cornelia is reading out the questions to me. So the question was, how many bowls crack? The losses that I would have would be really very minimal. And it's simply because I choose the right wood. I don't put wood into the kiln normally that has defects to start with. And I know a lot of people who have problems with bowls cracking. What they don't realize is that many of those cracks would be there already. So I choose prime material. I dry it slowly in the kiln. It takes about 6-7 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, depending on the species. And out of maybe 400 bowls, I would lose maybe 5 or 6. So not very many at all. I'm not somebody that really spends much time repairing bowls. So if something did crack, it's normally because there's a bark inclusion or there's a little defect in it. And I would just sell that onto another wood turner if it's safe for them to turn. If it's a major crack, and sometimes they will develop major cracks, a crack that runs from top to bottom, I'll just discard that completely. Sealing, there's a few options for sealing. So one product for sealing which would work really well is this one here. I'm just going to switch you over for a second to this one here. So this is an end seal made by Chestnut, and it's a wax emulsion. So that would work very, very well sealing the end grain of the wood. Another sealer that I've been working with for a long time is PVA sealer. It's like a woodworking glue, but I can buy it in 5 liters. And I buy that in my local hardware store. And was there another question, Cornelia?
Do you seal the whole thing?
And do I seal the whole thing? So let's take a look at the platter for a second, the platter blank, just to talk about if sealing of this piece if I was drying it out. So if I just change over the picture to this one here, so typically when I'm making my platters, I now have my own sawmill. So I'll just cut out boards that are 12 inches wide and maybe 10 feet long, whatever I can get onto the bed of the sawmill. But typically I'll only seal the ends of those. But if I'm rough shaping a bowl blank, with my salad bowls, I turn them twice and load them in the kiln, as you would have seen from the photographs. And the only thing I'll seal on the salad bowls is the end grain. So just here and just here. I don't seal it on the insides, and I don't seal the side surface of my salad bowls at all. So let's take a look at today's project. And this is a platter. I'll just give you a better view of this one if I can just switch over here for a second. So this is one that I've made earlier on from native Irish beech. We call this flame beech because it has this flame pattern running through it. So there's really quite a nice, attractive color in most of our beech once it gets over a certain size here in Ireland. What you'll notice as well, if I go to the sides here, you'll see the way the grain runs vertically. And so this came from a part of the tree where it's going to move very, very little as it dries out. So if I pick up the other platter for a second, or the platter blank that we're going to work on today, I'm not sure if I can focus on that. Is that focused? The grain runs straight down. And I'm going to just take you over to the whiteboard for a second. So this platter here came right from that position here, where the grain runs at 90 degrees to the face of the board. And what that means is that during the drying process, the shrinkage across this section is equal and it doesn't curl up. So the mistake that a lot of people make is they'll get a platter from either here or somewhere down there. And during the drying process, these rings here will all shorten. So you get the top of the piece of wood pulling down. And it's not really very pleasant to work or to have your dinner or lunch on a platter that's rocking on the table. And so it's important to get it there. And then what I'll get above, I'll get a salad bowl up here. It's a little bit more stable because of the thickness and the shape of the bowl. And then typically on the very large beech logs, if it's 30 inches wide, I'll get two bowls side by side. So I don't pay as much attention to the grain orientation with the salad bowl. The important thing for me is color as opposed to stability. And but with the platters, I'll take that in. So I think another question came in, but I'm going to have to start turning shortly. So, okay, so the question, where do I get my wood? Getting my wood is really quite straightforward. I just let the phone ring normally after a storm here in Ireland, and we seem to be getting more and more storms all the time. And I'm very lucky that my father is only up the road and my brother, and I have access to farm machines to go and collect some of those larger trees. I'd also recommend getting to know your local tree surgeon, and they will keep you in mind when they come across those big trees. The problem with buying the wood from the local wood supplier, if you're buying it dry from a wood turning store, is that you'll pay a lot of money for it. So if you're trying to make some money out of turning, you're better off to buy the tree and process it yourself. But if you just want to turn a platter, then by all means, go to the local wood store, buy it. And if you're not turning a lot of these pieces, it's a great way of getting the wood ready to turn. The other thing I would recommend is that don't worry so much about grain orientation if you're buying it from the local wood store, because you're not easily going to find the grain orientation that I'm recommending, which is quarter sawn wood. And let me see, the other question. Yes, the other question is it hardwood? Yes, so I work only with hardwoods. So I'm going to just move on to turning this. So let me just give you an overhead view for a second. I recommend using a faceplate. So I've got a 6-inch faceplate here. Some people like to use screw chucks. A screw chuck works fine, but it's important that the surface is really flat if using a screw chuck. Also, you need to use a spacer if working with a screw chuck, so you don't have the hole penetrating through the bottom. But I find a faceplate works well even if the surface is not completely flat. That's a standard faceplate that came with Vicmark. And so I'm just going to center it by eye. So I'm just going to reach over for a second. You're going to look at the top of my head for one moment. And the screws that I'm using are 25 millimeters long, and they're 4.5 millimeters in diameter. Because it's going into kiln dried wood, if the screws are any bigger, it could create a crack that spans the piece. So you need to be careful with that. It doesn't really matter in this case today which side I put the faceplate on, because the grain is pretty much the same no matter what side I put it on. So let's start with that. Normally I put in the first screw just a little bit of the way. Normally don't put it all in at once because it tends to pull the faceplate in the wrong direction. And now I'll just get that one in the whole way, finish that one off. I think one of the things that people don't like about faceplates, as I travel around, many people are surprised that I use a faceplate because they have difficulty. And normally the difficulty they'll have is that they're using the wrong screwdriver bit in the head and it starts to slip, or they're using old screws. The screws that I really like to work with are made by a company called Spax. I bought these from Axminster Power Tools in England. And these have a Torx head, or these actually have a Phillips head, but the newest ones that I've got actually have a Torx head, and I really like working with those. So let's pop that on the lathe, and then we'll get turning. I'm just doing a little check on the time, and I need to readjust the camera here for a second, so bear with me 1 second, guys. I want to give you a view of the lathe, and I will be back in 1 second. So I've just moved the camera from the flip chart in the back to the lathe. So let's just screw this on. So I normally use the hand wheel to feed it on, and just before it reaches the end of the tread, just give it a little slap like that. So the first thing I want to do here is get it running through on the outside edge. I'll give you an overhead view there for a second. And so the faceplate is pretty well centered, and I'm going to show you the tool that I'm going to work with now for a moment. Bear with me, reach over here. So this here is a 5/8 inch bowl gouge. It's one of my own signature tools, and I'll give you a closer look at the cutting edge on that if we can get it focused. So I would call this an Irish grind. It's sharpened to 55 degrees, and from the tip back to this shoulder is about 5/8 inch long, the same as the diameter of the tool. And it's sharpened, in this case, using the Tormek sharpening system. So I'm just going to button up my jacket here for a second, keep the wood chips out, and hopefully not dislodge my mic in the meantime. And I'm just looking for my red Sharpie. So I just want to give you a little pointer before I start turning. Those of you who know me will have heard me say this before, but many people are afraid of using this Irish grind tool. And this is a great way of making life easier for yourself. So if I take that Sharpie marker, run it down the center, the important thing when I'm using that tool is that I don't see that red marker. So when I hold that up to the bull blank, I turn it over until the red marker is gone and don't turn it any further. And that will cut very, very well without catching. The other thing that it's important to do as well is keep the handle down when you're making those heavy cuts. So when I'm rough shaping bows or even rough shaping this to begin with, drop the handle down to the ground. The more you bring the handle up, the less of a shear action you're getting, and the more likely it is to want to bite into the wood. They have this wonderful machine, they don't use it much anymore, in France called the guillotine. And the guillotine had a cutting edge on it about 45 degrees so that it also had the least resistance. So just bear that in mind about keeping the handle down. Speed of the lathe, I'm going to have the lathe running about 800 RPM. It's a little more, it's about 850 in this case. If I experience vibration, I'll just bring it down a little bit. That's one of the nice things about variable speed lathes. So let's just get a face shield on. Normally I work with a respirator, but in this case, you're not going to hear me very well if I put on the respirator. First thing I'm going to do is true up the outer edge, level off the face, mark it up, and then we'll start to put a shape on it. So we'll get an overhead view here again. The important thing is that I push down onto the tool rest rather than in against the wood. So if I push in against the wood, the tool tends to vibrate. So push down hard. Just before I get to the end, I'm going to stop. If I continue, I'll get some breakout happening there at the top of the plate. Just come in from the other side. So it's not perfectly flat. It's actually at a slight skew angle, but I'm not that worried about it. Some bandsaw marks there, so I need to just take that cut one more time. And what I'm going to do is just screw up that top surface. And it's important that you don't reach too far over the tool rest. If I was to reach in over the tool rest and try and work on the back, the tool is likely to catch. So I'll just screw up that outer edge, make sure that's right the whole way around. That's perfect. And now I'm going to level up the bottom and then mark it out. The dimension of this piece before I started, roughly about 12 inches in diameter, 30 centimeters by 1.25 inches, about 3 centimeters deep. Sometimes people will make these platters a little too deep, maybe 2 inches deep, 1.75 inches, and it tends to lose the proportions I would like at that stage for a platter. So off we go again. So a side view here. Because this surface is not completely flat, what I'm going to do is make what I call a pivoting cut. Actually, the tool rest is slightly too close to it. So I've just pulled the tool rest back far enough so that the tool is sitting on the bar as opposed to the bevel. And I set the tool rest height using this collar. The height is set so that the tool, when I present it, is on the center line. So a simple way of doing that, just finding the height of the tool rest, spin the lathe, mark the center using a pencil, continue that out from the center, put the tool up and just rotate in against the wood to exactly as I described before. You don't want to see the red line. And then at that point, you can just pull the tool towards yourself. And on this, I've bought this little, it's called a set collar. And it's easy enough to find those on the internet, even on eBay. And they're not sold usually for wood turners. They're sold to keep bearings onto a shaft. And I just added that little thumb screw instead of the Allen screw that came with it. So off we go again. So this is called a pivoting cut. The handle is up against my side, and I'll let you see that from overhead. I'll take off that sharp corner here in case it touches off my hand as I move in. And if you look at this from far away, the handle is up against my side, and I'm just swinging my body for maximum control. Okay, so at this point, I'm standing right foot forward, and then I'm going to pull the tool towards myself. And I find that the quickest way to level up an uneven surface. If I was to start by just pulling the tool towards myself on the uneven surface, you tend to get a little bit more vibration, make the tool vibrate in and out. So at this point, I'm going to bring up the speed of the lathe. Go back to the center again. And at this point, it should be pretty level, which it is. So you can see this flame pattern starting to come through. What I do see on it is this, this area is a little more red in color than the rest of it, both here and here. And I can see white specks throughout that surface there, which is like a mineral from the ground, like a silica that gets taken up from the ground as the tree grows, and that will make the tool edge dull very quickly. So I just have to bear that in mind, that it won't cut for much longer when you cut through that stone-like surface. So now what I have to do is decide on the width of the base. So on a salad bowl, I normally have a base 1/3 of the overall width. On a platter, I normally keep the base about 2/3 of the overall width, so that when you're applying pressure with a knife and fork on this surface, it's not rocking on the table. Normally on a salad bowl, I'll use a tenon. On a platter, I use a recess so that I'm saving wood. I'll go into a little bit more detail on that recess as I'm doing it, of course, but the recess is not completely flat. That surface is domed, which makes it less likely that I go through it on the other side. So I'm just going to guess the proportions for the base. I've made enough of these to know what I'm looking for. And then from the top, or on the edge, I should say, I'm going to make a line here about 5/16 down. And that will be the rim, but I'll make that a little thinner later on. So I'm going to adjust the tool rest for a moment. So the tool rest now is pretty much running parallel to those 2 pencil lines that I've just made. And I'm going to remove that material right here. So again, the handle is down. I'll just go back a little further for a second. So the handle is down. My body is parallel to the tool rest. And to make this cut, all I do is bend my left knee to move from the base towards the rim, always cutting in that direction so that I'm cutting with the grain. Left hand is just pushing down onto the tool rest. I'm going to move the tool rest. It's not quite at the right angle. And off we go again. So I'm cutting with the left hand edge of the tool. Let me just show you very, very quickly what's doing all the work on this. I'll just bring that in to focus there. So it's just cutting between the tip and about 1/4 of an inch up that edge, about 6 millimeters up. So it's not a very, very heavy cut that I'm making, but I'm not using the rest of that wing at all. I reserve that part of the edge only for cutting wet wood when I'm rough shaping on seasoned timber, not for this kiln dried stuff. And off we go again. So I'll let you see the shape take place here. Go again. Bring the tool rest in a little bit, and I need to take a little more off the base. And it's really important as I do this not to push into the wood. As I'm cutting along there, I'm riding the bevel at the tip here, and as I'm riding that bevel, if I push that in the direction of the wood hard, the tool starts to move in and out, creating spirals. So as the grain changes from side to end grain and you're pushing the tool against it, the tool tends to follow that irregular grain surface and start to vibrate. So the key always is to keep the pressure down and minimum pressure inwards. So next thing I'm going to do is start working on it's called a Roman ogee profile. So if I hold that one up from the side, I'll just try and get that in view. So what we have there at the top, a concave, then a convex, and then a concave here at the bottom. So the convex is about midway between here and here. The concave at that point is about midway between there and the center. And then the concave here is roughly in about 1 centimeter. So I'll mark that out. Generally, I don't mark these out. I just do them by eye. But because we're trying to help you do the same type of platter when you finish this, I'll give you all these details. So I'm marking halfway. This one in here is in about, well, let's go about 8 millimeters, about 5/16. And then this one halfway as well. So the next series of cuts I'm going to make is using the same tool, the 5/8 inch tool, 55-degree bevel, but I'm going to keep the handle way down, and I'm going to make a shearing cut using the left-hand wing. So this is more a refining cut. So it'll help me if I raise up the height of the tool rest as well. Some of the tool rests on the market are quite flat, and when you try to drop the handle, what happens is it picks up on this part of the tool rest and it can lift it off where you need the support. One way to avoid that is bring the height of the tool rest up a little bit past center as you're doing this cut. And I'm holding the tool here by the ferrule, handle is down and it's resting by my side. And I'm just using my body as I make that cut rather than just pulling the tool along with my hands. So I'll start here on the concave. Let you see that happening overhead. We'll take off a little bit more. So there we've got the concave, and we come out of the cut just before we meet the other line, and then we'll start back here midway between those other two lines. So we've got a concave here now as well. So now I'm going to make a cut from the bottom all the way to the top. So concave, convex, and concave. So the finish from that tool will be reasonably good. You can see the shavings that I'm getting from it there, but I can do much better than that. So what I'm going to do is put that tool away for a second and pick up another one that looks just like it, only it's smaller and sharpened at a different angle. So this one here is sharpened to 45 degrees. I've taken a lot off the heel of that tool as well, which really is only a benefit as I'm going around the inside of a platter of a bowl or a bowl. It eliminates ridges if I soften that heel a little bit. But the bevel leading up to the tip is at 45 degrees. This is a 1/2 inch bar. So the shavings from this will be smaller, and this is called a pull cut, or I call it, by some people, I call it a shearing cut as well. Handle way down, again resting up against my hip. And I'll do a little bit with you watching my body movement, and then I'll get you in a little closer. And now let's switch cameras for a second. You'll see that the shavings have got much finer with that tool, and that'll lead to a lot less sanding with that shearing cut. But actually there's a cut better than that called a push cut, and the push cut is normally my first choice, and then I finish with the shearing cut if there's patches that I'm not entirely happy with. So I'll let you see the push cut, which will do that surface, it will get the surface much better with less sanding. So for a push cut, I put my 4 fingers underneath, thumb on top. I'm going to increase the speed. So the speed now is up about 1300 RPM. So I'm going to start with the concave. Convex. Start again. Okay, and I'll just stop there for a second. If you lose the cut, just like I did there the first time I made the cut, you're better off to stop and go back to the beginning again. If you try and take too light a cut or start the cut again where you lost it, it's really difficult. So you have to take a pretty heavy cut to hold the tool in place as you make the push cut. But the difference is that you get these big long shavings that are not broken, and a much better surface finish. So I'm pretty happy with that, but normally what I would do as a plan B, if necessary, is just come back on that surface just to the areas that might have a little bump, rather than using a scraper, and that's just a shear cut. And the shear cut you can take off these lightest shavings just for that perfect finish, which leads to very, very little sanding. So next thing I have to do on that is the base. And I want the base tapered in just slightly so it sits on the outer edge. And to make that cut now, I'm going to stand right foot forward, handle by my side, and just lean forward, pushing towards you guys. So I'll go back to the side view again. And again, it's really important that I put all the pressure down on the tool rest and not into the wood. So look how I'm holding the tool, little finger here, 3 on top, just pushing it down. And off we go again. And as I got to center there, I just raised up the handle of the tool, so I ended up exactly on the center line. So that's left that surface pretty smooth. I'm going to just take the ruler for a second and try the ruler from above. And I can see, I don't know if you can see it from where you're sitting in your chairs, but there is a slight gap there on the inside of that ruler. So that's tapered in slightly. Don't go in too far on that. So next thing I want to do is just decide which chuck I'm going to use. I don't like to work with chuck jaws that are too small. Expand it out because you put all the pressure on just 4 points. So I'm going to work with a chuck that's roughly about 3 inches on the outside, and I'm going to keep it closed down almost to a perfect circle as I expand in there. And what that means is I can have a recess that's quite shallow, and I will have a really strong grip. But I quite often see that when somebody buys a chuck for the first time, it comes with a tiny set of jaws. I'll give you an example. So this is a Vic Mark chuck, and these are the standard jaws that come with it. And it really is quite tiny. These are, it's less than 2 inches, about, I think it's 1 3/4 on the outside. And if you have to expand that into a large recess, it's opened out wide, and you are only putting pressure on 4 points. So you end up doing a lot of damage to your recess and having to make a very deep recess to try and limit that damage. So my preference then is to go for a set of jaws much bigger than that. I'm going to work with this chuck here. This is the Vic Mark 120 chuck, and I really like dovetail jaws. So all my chucks have dovetail jaws. If I take you in a little closer on this, I had a little input on the design of these jaws. They look quite standard as you look at them, but there is something a little different. The first 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters on these jaws is flat, and then it's tapered in slightly. So it means that I can have a sort of a dome shape on the recess at the bottom of this platter, which makes it less likely to go through. And it's only seating here on the outer edge. So it works really, really well. So what I'm going to do is just take a measurement from those chuck jaws when they're closed down. So there's a question about the wood type. So that's Irish beech, native Irish beech. And we've got lots of it around here. So what I'm going to do just before I take the measurement, let me just grab the chuck key for a second, is just make sure the calipers that I'm going to work with fit right between those jaws as I measure. So that will slide in. That'll allow me to check the measurement and see what I've got at the bottom of these at all times. So I'll leave those calipers just out of the way for a moment. And I have my dividers lined up. And I'm going to just scribe that diameter, the outside diameter, onto the base. I just want to keep an eye on the time. So we have about 15 minutes before our break. Okay, so that's set to the outside diameter. And before I scribe the base, let's have a look at these. So these are not quite regular dividers. These are, when they were bought, they were used, I suppose, for engineers' purposes rather than a wood turner's purpose. So it's sharp on one side with a sharp point, but on this side here, what I've done is I've rounded it over. So I'm not sure if that can focus there. So that's rounded over here so that if it comes into contact on this side of the platter that's going up, it's not going to catch if it rubs. So typically when I'm using this, I have to lift the handle slightly. So I'll raise it up and it's cutting with the left-hand side. I'm going to make one random mark to start with. And the random mark, I can see that's where my center is as it's turning. So what I'm going to do is just make a mark that's a little smaller than the diameter I need, and then make the correct size. So that's too small. And I'm going to do that again. Let me just mark that with a pencil so you see it a little better. And now I'm going to split the difference and eyeball that. I have to raise this side up slightly so that I'm taking the measurement right through the center line. If I keep it flat on the tool rest, it'll be below the center line and the measurement will be incorrect. That's it. And we're going to work with that outside line. So next tool we're going to use is a scraper. So bear with me 1 second and I'll just reach for that. I have the place all nicely organized in here. It's really it's great to just be able to reach out and find these tools. They've all been in boxes for quite some time. So I'm going to let you have a closer look at this. This is just a square end scraper that's been modified. It's about 3/4 inch wide. There's a little taper on this side here, and that gives it clearance as it cuts in on that recess circle. It's square for the first 1/4 inch, 6 millimeters, and then gets rounded over. So I'm just going to cut with that area mark with the green marker first. And then when I've removed all the material, I bring the handle away and start to cut with this part that got that round surface, and that will get rid of some of these ridges. When I'm using this tool, I keep the handle just underneath my arm, just slightly raised. Don't drop the handle. If you do, you'll get a catch. And it'll remind you very quickly that you have to keep the handle slightly up. When I'm holding it, it's just held like that rather than like this. If you hold it like that and get a catch, you're going to be the first to know about it. Now, what I'm going to have to do here, because when I bring that up, let me just mark that across. When I bring that up, I can see if I raise the handle, it's not lining up with that center line. So I'm going to have to raise the tool rest to compensate. And off we go again. So I'm going to leave the material in the center because I want that to be domed. So I'm going to start cutting just away from center, getting slightly deeper all the time. And then take one more cut, slightly deeper. Bring the handle away now and then just slide it back and forth. Get rid of any of those ridges. Okay, so that's left the surface pretty decent, I would imagine. It's got some whiskers over here, as you can see on the outside edge, but now what I need to do is just define that dovetail there on the outside. But that here has a nice soft dome at the bottom. It looks much better than just a flat surface if you're leaving that recess. So we've got a question there come in.
Use a skew on the side instead of modifying the scraper.
I'm going to use this. So the question was, I'll just repeat it in case you didn't hear Cornelia, why not use a skew on the side instead of a modified scraper? The reason for that is that a skew chisel will lose its edge very, very quickly. It's a much finer edge than a scraper. It's not really supported, and so you lose the edge very quickly. But I'm actually going to define the dovetail with the skew chisel. So I tend to use two tools. You could definitely remove the material with the skew, all of the material with the skew chisel, but you're just going to have to sharpen it a little more often. So in production, I keep that square end scraper. I don't sharpen it too often, but I would get several platters out of it before I need to sharpen it. And if I was to use the skew chisel, I would end up, to do the entire recess, I would end up sharpening it for every platter that I do. So it just less work.
And if you don't have a scraper, what other tool would you use?
If you don't have a scraper, what other tool? Skew chisel. So that is it. You could also, you could take it out with a spindle gouge. There are many ways of doing it, and you watch somebody else, they'll show you other ways and tell you, never mind what Glenn Lucas told you. There are many ways of doing the same thing, but I find that works really, really well. But a spindle gouge would do that too if you have an acute angle on the tip of it to cut the dovetail at the end. So I'm going to come in here now. Let me just switch the camera. Again, I hold the skew chisel in the same way. I just put my finger here on top, handle underneath my arm, and just tilt it up a little bit. I have to pull the tool rest back a little bit more because there's a longer bevel on that. And I need to raise the tool rest up a little bit, and so I'm getting into this area here. Now, because I'm using this skew chisel for cutting those dovetails, what I've done, you'll see down here, you see the way I've relieved that corner. So as I get into the recess, it has clearance there so that it's not hitting on this surface here below the center line as it's going in, which will push the tool in towards the center. So relieving that area there just helps it get tight into the corner. Make sure you don't bring that up to the corner, so it stops shy of getting to the corner. You lose that point, and this is not going to work at all. So off we go. We just actually, I'm going to swing the camera just a little bit. There we go, and I think you'll get a better view without my arm getting in the way. Just pushing straight in, reach the bottom, slide across, and it's done. As I get towards the center, I just drop the handle so I'm not left with a little dimple in there. So at this point, that surface is ready to sand. We're going to stop for a break in about 10 minutes time, and at that point, I can answer some more of the questions that have come in. Have any more urgent questions come in, Cornelia?
How deep is the mortise as long as the diameter is properly sized?
How deep is the mortise? The mortise in this situation here is, it looks about 2.5 millimeters deep. I wonder, can I go in a little bit more on that? So it's incredibly shallow, but the secret of this working well, as I said before, is that the jaws are closed down to that circle. You know, take for example, if I grab, let me just grab another chuck here for a moment. I'll just let you see where I'm going. But let me see. If I take this chuck here, which is the baby Vic Mark chuck, and if I open up those jaws just like that and keep expanding, that's going to do two things. One is that as I put pressure opening into that recess, it's just going to break the wood away at those 4 points. So the only way that this would work, and in some situations I'm forced to do this, and those situations are when I'm traveling abroad teaching, and the only thing I have to turn my demo piece is an undersized chuck I have to open up. So the only thing I can do in that situation is to make that recess a lot deeper so that I just don't break it out, because the pressure on that alone would break that away before I'd even start to turn it. And so the secret is bigger jaws, perfect circle, and it will be a much more pleasant base on the platter, and very secure. So let me just pop that away, put that back up there, and put this out of the way. So at this point, we are ready to sand that piece, and I'm going to get a little glass of water for a moment. And I'm done with the face shield until I turn that around. And the finish that I'm using on this is chestnut food safe oil. And let me just let you have a closer look at that. Food safe finish. And I have this little tray with a magnet at the bottom so that when I put it down on the lathe, it sticks and doesn't fall off. So we'll just put a little bit of that in. And the good thing about this oil is that if it spills on the lathe, it's not going to harm it. In fact, it would stop it from rusting. And I'm just reaching down here for some oil. So I'm going to wet sand this piece. So instead of using electric sander or Velcro sanding pads in my electric drill, and the reason I'm choosing wet sanding today is that we have a lot of electric gear in here, Cornelia's in here, and it would create a lot of dust, and we both would need to wear respirators as I do this. And wet sanding is a great way, as I said, of keeping the dust down, but it's very effective at removing material quickly as well. So it's a good opportunity to let you see that. So I'm going to just put on that oil. It's a good idea to put it on without the lathe spinning, or else it'll just end up all over you. And you can see the way the color is really starting to come out in that piece now. I believe it is mineral-based oil, yeah. Terry can answer all those questions. But it's a low viscosity, and normally the one that you get in the mineral oil that you can get across the counter tends to be a much thicker consistency, and the lighter oil penetrates a lot deeper, making it much more effective at keeping out the water when you wash it, and also some of the food that you will contain in this. Okay, so that's all the oil that I need on that. So what I'm going to do now is just reduce the speed of the lathe, and let me just grab the sandpaper. So the sandpaper is this flexible back sandpaper, aluminium oxide, a cloth back, so when I fold it over, it doesn't break up. Now, I know a lot of you guys were probably working with Abranet, which I highly recommend. It's really good, but you'll see very quickly for this wet sanding, you will not want to reuse this paper again. It gets very mucky very quickly, and I tend to keep the Abranet for dry sanding. So what I'm doing here is I'm just dipping the sandpaper into the oil. I'll bring the speed down so I don't cover myself with the oil, and bring it up. The speed a small bit. I'm just putting my hand above it to see is there anything coming off, and there's not. And then if you look at how I'm going to grip this tool, the sandpaper, put one hand underneath the other. Actually, I'm a little too close on this camera now, so let me just go back a little bit.
Lots of questions about oil.
Okay. We're taking a break shortly, so I'm sure Terry could answer.
Will it oil at this stage cause problems when you come to sign your work?
Will putting the oil on at this stage cause problems when it comes to signing the work? Absolutely not. It does, you'll notice that the surrounding area sort of gets a little wet as you sign it, but it just wipes straight off. I tend to have all my oiling done before I sign any bowl. I get all that out of the way. It doesn't do it any harm, I find. So,
I use walnut oil. Would that be okay for this?
Yeah, walnut oil works well as well. But I just want to show you, so the question was, the person said they used walnut oil, would it be okay for this? So walnut oil does work well for wet sanding too. So that's the paste that's coming off, and then there's no dust whatsoever in the air, which is very, very nice. So the grits that I normally would work with if I was power sanding with electric drill, on a piece like this, it would be 120, 180, 240, and 320. The wet sanding today, I'm doing this with 180 grit, and then I'll finish with 240 and 320. I find that when I wet sand, the sandpaper is much more effective at removing a lot of material quickly, and it does not clog up. So the sandpaper, just because it's lubricated, let me see if I can focus there, it just gets the paste and it just keeps on working. Quite often when the sandpaper stops working, it's clogged as opposed to being worn out. So I'm applying quite a bit of pressure here. I'll fold over a little bit of sandpaper and just get in here. So I'm going to increase the speed a little bit. It's now about 500 RPM. I'm not going to sand the dovetail. If I sand the dovetail, it'll lose all that detail. And the dovetail is exactly at 77 degrees. That's the angle on my skew chisel, so that it matches up with the chuck jaws. Okay, so I'm going to put this guy away for a second. And moving on to the 240 grit. Again, dip it in the oil. If this is starting to dry out on the surface, don't be afraid to put another bit of oil on it. But you can see that already it's looking quite well. There's no torn grain in it. So it's quite effective. Applying quite a bit of pressure onto it. So that's why I'm using my second hand there to just control it. A little bit more on the base. And then a little more down there. And then last one, 320. So the question was, how do you prevent circular sanding lines? You really have to just go through the grits quite thoroughly. And so if you start skipping grits, you're more likely to get them. But when you just use handheld sandpaper dry, you are very likely to see those circular scratches that we're talking about. But with power sanding, they tend to be concealed somewhat because the sander is the power sander is going in a different direction. It's spinning as well as the bowl, so scratches are not as obvious. But if you go to about 400 grit and take your time with the sandpaper, not skipping anything in between, then you shouldn't have too many scratches. And the important thing is that I want people to use these platters. And so if you do too good a job on them, they won't want to use them. So those few little scratches in it will have it looking authentic. So what I want to do is just buff it at the end. So I'm using a bit of paper towel this time, so that if it happens to catch, it'll just tear. Increase the speed just to burnish it in a little bit. And typically I will leave that overnight, not for the finish to cure, because that finish, I don't think it changes in property. I don't think it dries actually. I think it just soaks in. I could be wrong, but what I tend to do is leave it overnight and allow the grain to raise, and then reverse the lathe. On this lathe here, I can lock the faceplate on, but this time I'm going to use a silicon carbide sandpaper, and this is like a hand finishing sandpaper. It comes in large sort of A4 size sheets. I just tear up small bits, and then I'll, wrong direction, reverse the lathe, but this is normally done the next day, and this gets the grain going the opposite direction, so that when you feel this piece in a week's time, it's still going to be smooth. But 24 hours is normally a good thing to just leave it sitting there, or even longer, and it just lets that grain raise up. And then if you want, you can put on another coat of oil. What? So the question is spalted beech safe to use with food? I would say yes. And a good person to talk to, if you ever get a chance, is a woman called Sari Robinson. She has written this wonderful book on spalted wood. And so I asked her about it last year. And the spores that are in spalted beech, you're breathing them in all the time. So it's not a problem. The important thing for me with spalted beech is that it hasn't decayed so far that the wood is coming apart. So my general rule of thumb with spalted beech, if I can leave a mark with my fingernail, I will not use it. So a little bit more oil, and then that is that. So what I'm going to do is just dry my hands off, take it off the lathe, and we will take a little break, but I'm going to just sit there and let Terry do some talking again. So Terry, do you want to switch on for a second? Oh, I'm going to need to use the wrench there for a second.
Yep, here I come. Hang on. Here we go. There I am. I knew I was there
I thought you'd fallen asleep, Terry.
No. I am really enjoying the demo. It's
Good.
yeah. I'm not a turner. I make no secret of the fact, but it's I'm really enjoying this, and yeah, it makes me think. Oh, I should really have a go at this. I'm probably never going to because I'm never going to find the time. But I'm really enjoying the demo, and yeah, it explains so well, and it makes perfect sense to me. Nearly everything you're saying, which for a complete novice, in fact, even less than a novice, that's a good thing. So absolutely
Good.
fantastic. I'm really
But
enjoying.
when you'll have to come to Ireland for a class. When we run classes here, for example, on a Saturday, people who have never turned before in their life will go away with a platter not too unlike this. So I just take it step by step with them. When I'm doing these in production, I don't measure anything. Well, the only thing I measure is before I cut it on the bandsaw. Cutting it into a circle, I'll measure the 12 inches and I'll measure the thickness. But that's where measuring finishes. After that, I do things by eye. But it helps in a demo if I give that information for sure.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's important. It's the stuff people need to know. So that's absolutely great. There's a lot of questions coming in as well, and I'm missing them. So someone asked about lemon oil for wet sanding, and yeah, that's absolutely fine. Lemon oil, finishing oil, they'll all do the same job pretty much. You won't have the food safety aspect with it, but they will do it because they're slower drying, and that's the important factor there. You need a slower drying coating to lubricate the sandpaper, the abrasive. You could even wet sand with something like microcrystalline wax. That will do the job very well as well. So someone's asking about. Go on. Sorry.
It's what I find is it's just so effective at taking away material quickly. One thing it can do is it can grain fill, but if you get a pretty decent finish with the tool, that's less likely to happen. If you have really badly torn grain, it's going to fill all of that, so it's going to look great until somebody washes it. So that's okay.
It could hide those authentic scratches that you're leaving in as well. So
exactly. There's just a couple of questions coming in at the moment. Do you want me to address some of them, Terry? Or
yeah, go for it. Yeah. Go for it.
So somebody has asked me, how do you sign your work? So that is something I would have got to at the end, but I use a Peter Child pyrography pen, which I believe is now made by Robert Sorby. And it's just made with a little bent wire that's quite fine. And I bought mine 20 years ago, and it still has the original roll of wire that came with it. I'm only quarter way through that roll, and I've signed every bowl that's ever left this place with it. So it works really well.
This person uses an archival grade pen. You don't use a pen.
No, so somebody was saying they use an archival grade pen. You have to be careful when you're using this type of oil. If you're using some of those felt pens, it can run. So the pyrography pen, I find that burns it in, will work pretty much with any finish I've ever worked with. Why use tin for oil?
What was the use of the tin to prevent the contents of the bottle getting contaminated?
Okay, so somebody was asking about why I use the tin instead of using it for the oil. It's just much easier to dip the cloth into the oil in the wider tin, rather than you get less oil coming out onto the cloth if you just try and turn the bottle over into the cloth. So I find the tin a little easier. That's all. I don't worry about contaminating the content at all. It's only wood dust. And yeah, the other one's it's a personal, so I won't mention that one.
Okay. Chestnut, would it be better to wet sand with wax more than oil? Would oil not raise the grain of the wood, making it more of a job to sand?
So I don't know if you heard that. I'll repeat it. Does Cornelia's voice come through, or is she too far away from the microphone, Terry?
We can hear her, but not clear enough to know what the question is.
I've forgotten the question already. So
sand with wax more than oil, would it not raise?
Would it be better to wet sand with wax more than oil? Would the oil not be more likely to raise the grain? Raising the grain is not a bad thing because you have a chance to sand it the second time before it leaves your shop. I use these platters, we use these platters in our own home all the time. So after washing those several times, if the grain raises, down the road, the person who gets the platter will not have a lathe to resand them. So you could apply oil 2 or 3 times on it, sand it in reverse, get the grain raised up. It's going to stop raising the grain at some point, and then that's the end of it. So it is very effective.
And I would say probably the oil doesn't really get it wet enough to actually raise the grain in the way that water would. So if you're wet sanding with water, which would be working against yourself, it wouldn't really make that much difference. But the oil isn't going, oils don't tend to raise the grain in the same way that water would, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Another question come in. Do you know how many bowls roughly you've turned in your professional lifetime?
I get this, I'm asked this all the time, and the interesting thing is that when sometimes people stand up to introduce me, they've got a figure that's blown completely out of proportion, but I just sit back and smile. I suppose when I was in full production for quite a few years, it was in around 3,000 plus bowls every year. So I did always have to work quite quickly, and I never planned on ever teaching. I always thought I would spend my life as just a production bowl turner, and it was just the last recession when it came along. All of a sudden, people had a choice of paying their mortgage or buying a Glen Lucas salad bowl, and the mortgage was winning out in most situations. I started to teach at that point and realized actually I like this. So now I'm, this year is an exceptional year. Salad bowl sales through retail outlets have really come to a halt because all the retail outlets in Ireland have closed. And most of our sales are from our website. And I actually think in the future, because I do like selling direct, I will probably sell less to shops and focus more on selling directly from both our online shop and here and our classes. So I want to have balance in my life as I get into my later years, I suppose. But I still have a few years left in me, I think.
Oh, I hope so. Definitely.
Any other questions, Terry?
Yeah, what angle do you have on your scraper? Square scraper is that, I think.
The square scraper is sharpened to about 60 degrees or so. So it's quite a steep angle that's on it. I actually sharpened it exactly to 66 degrees when I'm sharpening the scraper, but that's what my angle gauge gives me as I'm setting up my grinder. But somewhere between 60 and 70 degrees works pretty well on that tool, and it holds onto that burr longer when you've got a steeper angle on it.
Yeah. Okie dokie. And someone's also asked if you ever use sanding sealers, which obviously you wouldn't do with an oil, but I don't know if you use them otherwise.
I do not use sanding sealers. However, in the early days, I used to use sanding sealers with the oil, and that was through recommendation from 2 well-known wood turners, one Ray Key and the other Liam O'Neill. So Liam O'Neill, the Irish wood turner who developed the Irish grind back in the 70s. But Liam would always put on mineral oil first, and then he would put a shellac sanding sealer on top of that. Let that cure, and then the following day, when the grain raises, he would put on some oil, more oil as a lubricant, and then likely sand it to get rid of the raised grain. So Liam still does that to this day, and they're every bowl he's ever made in 40, 50 years, most of them have been done that way. So it must work.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm not going to argue with that one.
No, but that's fine. But I have stopped using the sanding sealer. I used it for a couple of years after watching Liam, and now I don't use the sanding sealer myself anymore. There's another question is, should the platters be re-oiled after use? The answer is yes, yes, yes. So, a couple of times a year we would put some oil on our platters in the kitchen, keeps them in good shape, stops them from drying out, and it stops them from absorbing water. That's the important thing. And you don't have to spin it on the lathe, but if you have it on the lathe and you've got a recess in it, it's easy to remount it. Yeah. But if you sell it, I give a care card with my bowl, and I always recommend that the customer who buys it would re-oil it. Don't immerse it in water. Wipe it with a damp cloth after use. Don't put it in the dishwasher. Don't put it in the microwave, and don't put it in the oven. And other than that, we give a lifetime guarantee.
That's it. I mean, it's amazing sometimes how people need to be educated about what you can do with can and can't do with wooden objects. The ring that you've got on your the collar that you've got on your tool post, that's sparked a lot of interest. I don't know if you're able to just tell a little bit more about that.
Let me zoom in on it. I'll bring it in a little closer. So it's called a set collar. So if you Google set collars, you will get those in every size under the sun. And they're not made for tool rest. They're made basically to retain a shaft within bearings. So it comes with a little grub screw in here, which I just unscrew. And I've bought this separately. It's an MA thread, and I bought that little screw separately. And but you can buy, let me center that again. You can buy those with, that's a 30 mil center. You can buy it with 1 inch, 25.4 or 25, in all different sizes. What will work equally well, sorry, it's out of focus now if I don't keep it centered, is a hose clip, just a regular hose clip of the right size. It'll do the same thing and it costs a fraction of the price, but those are about €4 or €5. So I just buy the right thing, and it looks well and it works well. But it means one of the advantages of using that is that when I raise up the tool rest for some of those shear cuts or to use the scraper, when I bring it back down, it's set where the tool can cut on the center line. So it just means I don't have to think. And another question that came in, do you need to raise the grain after power sanding? As soon as you put on the oil, the grain tends to raise. So if I power sanded it, I would do it dry. The power sanding does not work with oil on it because it just gums up the sanding discs in seconds. But as soon as you put on the oil, it does raise the grain. So it's not a bad idea to sand that after the oil goes on the following day. And there's another one. They're coming in here fast and hard. Let me see. I just want to make sure I'm not reading the same ones out here again. So who makes your tools? The tools that I use are made by Hamlet in Sheffield, England, and they are my own signature tools. And let me just, could you give me the screen again for a second?
You've got it, yeah.
Yeah, so there's two different types. So these are M42, which tends to stay, let me see if I need to get my hand behind it. Which way are we going? This way. There we go. Yeah, so they're made M42 steel, high-speed steel, which means they stay sharper longer than regular high-speed steel. Do you need M42 steel? The answer is no. It just minimizes the sharpening just a little bit. But the important thing for me with the tools that I own, if I can get that to focus, is they have what's called a parabolic flute. So the flute shape is a sort of an elliptical curve as you look down the end rather than a V or a U. And they are much easier to sharpen, and you're much more likely to get that curvature, just like your fingernail, on that cutting edge with a parabolic flute. Whereas if you use a V or a U-shaped bowl gouge and try and sharpen the Irish grind on it, it tends to dip down right at that sweet point there. And that doesn't work for me. So the other thing that's important with these tools is they come with sharpening charts. I don't have the fold-out sharpening chart here with me right now. Let me just put this away for a second. But if I just change that for a second. So it just comes with a fold-out version of this sharpening chart, which gives you, let me see if I can stop that from being it's a little too bright in here. It gives you information on basically the color. So they're all named, first of all, with GL4, 5, or 6. So the one I used for rough shaping to start with was the GL4. It's got a 55-degree bevel at the tip, heels taken off it. But those are the jig settings that I use on the Tormek for that. And then what I've got here on the other side of that one is woodcut. So these are available to download from our website. And that has got the same information. It's got those jig settings, the number that you set the jig to, the protrusion of the tool from the jig, and how far the V-arm or the pivot point is away from the wheel. So I've those made up that they come with those tools, or you can buy these things individually, which help people repeat my grind, excuse me. Okay, back to you, Terry, again.
Okay, hang on. Forgotten which button to press. Oh, that one. Right, okay. The questions are coming in thick and fast, and I think we're going to have to move on from those in a moment. Di mentioned about some small bottles of food safe finish to give or sell when you give when someone buys a platter or a bowl. It's something we keep looking at. We haven't got the packaging and that right on it, but it is something that we're considering. And someone asked, how long have you been? No, well, I'll ask you the other way around. How old were you when you started turning, Glenn?
I was 16 years old.
Right.
And my very first...
So not long ago then, really?
Not long ago. It was about 5 years ago or so. But I grew up on a farm. I was visiting a local engineer who was repairing a part of a farm machine, and in the corner I saw this machine with a block of wood mounted on it. No idea what it was, but the person who was doing the engineering work, Jim Quirk, said to me if I wanted to have a go, I could do that while I was waiting for him to make the repair. And after putting the tool down, I asked him, was the machine for sale? I asked him what it was called. And I came back about 2 hours later with a tractor and trailer, and I was the owner of a lathe. And it had a gearbox on it from a Fiat car. It had first, second, third, fourth, and reverse. So it was pretty crude, but it was wonderful.
Fantastic. That's a great story. I love that one. Alrighty. So, folks, I know that there are some questions we haven't got to, but our 5-minute break is now into about 20 minutes. So I'm going to let Glenn carry on. We will try, if we can, to cover some of the unanswered questions during the Zoom session afterwards. We will do what we can. So the questions are great. Thank you. Please keep them coming. But we can. There's a limit to what we can do at the moment. There's so many coming in. But Glenn, I'll put you back on, and you can do your thing again on your
Perfect. I'm ready to go. Okay. Thanks, Terry. Okay, so we're back to doing the other side of this platter. Just one thing I'll mention before I move on is that now that we're in this building, we will start our own Zoom demonstrations again. And so check out our website if you're interested in coming on to some of those demos. And we do record our own demonstrations, and we record them in high definition. And they are also available on our website, sort of edited version, so that you're missing anything you don't need to hear. So let's have a closer look at what this looks like. So that's what we've got after sanding it. So you can see the base. I don't know if you can see it. There's a slight dome on that there, but it actually took very little sanding after that scraper. So it just shows how effective the scraper is down there. And but we've got nice crisp lines, and that's what I'm looking for. So we're going to do the other side now. First thing I'm going to do is just put the chuck into the lathe. I always just clean that back surface there and make sure it's clean on this surface. And the same way I put on my faceplate, I use the hand wheel to feed it on rather than locking the spindle, less likely to damage the thread. Give it a little flick at the end, and I'll take you overhead for a second. And let's take off this faceplate. I have a whole selection of faceplates here. I like to work with the 6-inch simply because it gives it the maximum amount of support. I have 8 and 10-inch faceplates there as well. And if I was turning a bigger platter, you get less vibration with the larger plate. The other thing is, if that surface here is not completely flat and it's high in 2 points, what I normally do is line up 2 of the screw holes with the high points and balance out the 2 side screws so that the gap that's here and here is equal on both sides, so that you're not taking all the wood off one side as you're turning it to start with. And that's why I really like the faceplate. You don't have to get it perfectly flat for this to work very well. So let's get rid of that. Pop that out of the way. We're done with the screws. And while I'm looking for things, I'll let you see where I'm looking. So I've just got the chuck key. And what I'll do before I put the piece in the chuck, just make sure those jaws are spotless. Make sure there's no dust or debris in the recess. And also, it's a really good idea to try and line up the slot in the jaws. Either way will work with the grain. So get the slot into a vertical position, get the grain into a vertical position, and expand. So you're hitting the same density of grain both sides. If you use a smaller set of jaws, expanded, it's really important that you try and line up the slot with the grain. It's more likely to run through when you reverse it. So I put my thumb in the center, use the thumb in the center. Once I get a little purchase on that, get my 2 hands onto the chuck key, and I'm going to just go to the other side, and that's exactly what I need there. Okay, so back to the inside again. So the tool that I'm going to work with to start with is back to that 5/8 inch bowl gouge. Typically, I wouldn't resharpen at this point unless I really had to. And because it's just rough cuts that I'm making. And the edge that I'm going to be using for a lot of the hollowing out is the right-hand wing in a few moments after I get this level. And that hasn't been used yet on the outside. But for the finishing cuts, I will resharpen the tool. So let me just get rid of the oil for a second so it's not just filling up with the wood chips, and get that out of the way. Get my face shield on, and off we go again. So that should be running reasonably through, which it is. So speed is up now about 1200 RPM. I'm actually going to pull the tool rest back towards myself a little bit so I have somewhere to rest my arm as I make the cut. If it's too far forward, your arm is going to be out there, not supported, and you're less likely to be able to make the cut you want with the control that you need. So off we go again. So this is doing nothing other than creating a little ring, and it's getting the piece running through. As I get towards center, I get slightly deeper. So I'm not hollowing it out at this stage, I'm just leveling off. And I'm just going to go back here for a second so you see how I move my body. I'll let you see that again. As I get towards the center now, I am down to about 8 millimeters deep, so I am getting deeper. Tool rest just moved in a little. And right there in the center, I'm 3/8 of an inch deep down from that surface there. So I've got all these rings, which are really useful when it comes to hollowing out a platter or indeed a bowl, because it gives me somewhere to rest the tool to stop the tool from skating. If those rings aren't there and the surface is completely flat, when you put the tip in at a slight angle, the tool will race to its left. So if I was to lie it like that, the tool would skate back this way, or if I turned the tool to the right, the tool would skate towards center. So it just eliminates that. Now I'm going to leave the center alone for the moment, because if I hollow that out now and there is some stress locked up inside this, that's likely to move a little bit before I'm even finished. And that is pretty normal, that there is some movement from the beginning to the end of turning a platter, because this has not been rough shaped. Generally, there's less movement with my salad bowls afterwards, because the center has been hollowed out, but there's normally a little give. It's not much, but you will see there's a slight little tremor on that surface, particularly if it's not quarter sawn. And I'm just going to turn on a fan. What you can't see here is I have a fan made by Powermatic. It's about that diameter, but it's really quiet, so you can't hear it in the background, but it helps keeping the air clean in here. So I'm going to change to another tool now. We're going back to this 3/8 or 1/2 inch bowl gouge, and I'm going to work on the rim for the moment.
Can you talk for a moment about double-ended handles, whether they fit into final?
So there's a question there that came in about a double-ended bowl gouge, if it fits into the Jimmy Cluse handle. The answer is, I honestly don't know. There is a variation between the diameter of tools between one company and another. And then over the years, for example, my tools for many years would fit in the Trent Bosch handles, but recently they don't, because he's changed the bore slightly in them. So I don't know the answer to that, unfortunately. Okay, so we're back now to the inside again. So working on the rim. So handle is up against my side. And as I move forward, I just bring my hip away, which creates a curve on that surface. And I'm going to stop about there. And I just have to be careful that the cut doesn't get too deep as I get in here, because the right-hand wing can start to catch in the end grain. So you just have to be really, really careful that you take this in small cuts, and each cut stops before meeting the last cut. That's quite important. So off we go again. We'll stop there. So for the moment, I'm happy enough with the rim. I'll just leave that alone for a second. What I'm going to do before things start to move a little bit is I'm going to just work on this outside edge. I want that to be rounded over. So when this is finished and I'm holding this plate full of food, that should be nice and soft just here on my hand. So I think Cornelia will save the questions for the Zoom demo. We'll see how we get on, because I still have quite a bit of work to do. So soften this edge here, handle way down towards the ground, pull it towards myself. Go again. Okay, so Cornelia just mentioned, don't be afraid to send in your questions. Cornelia will catalog them and we will try and answer them later.
You're not answering, but I'm...
Yeah, so Cornelia is not letting them go, and we'll answer what we can. Off we go again. And back to the other side. So it is critical that you keep the handle toward the ground as you do this. Right now, I'm pretty much working one-handed. Thumb is just pushing the tool down onto the tool rest. And now we've got a nice soft edge there. We'll go over here. And what I'm going to do is create half a bead here on this side. But that feels pretty good in the hand. Actually, I'm going to take a little bit more off this. We'll stop just about there. And now I'm coming in from the other side to create that half bead. Now, if you're not as precise as you would like to be with the the bowl gouge, what you can do is use the skew chisel there. And that skew chisel will work just like a negative rake scraper in that the edge on it is sloping down. It's not likely to catch. So I'll show you how to do that. So again, handle underneath my arm, handle raised just a little bit. I put my hand behind it just to support it. And I can also turn it upside down just to get a little bit around the corner. But again, don't drop the handle or that tool will catch. Okay, so at this point, the rim's done, the half bead's done. We just have to take away the rest of the material in the center. And that's it, just oil it after that. I need another little bit of water. Now, in hollowing out a platter, you can do things a little different than a bowl because it is quite shallow. So to take out the rest of the material here, it's fine if I continue to push in towards the headstock, but typically if that's a salad bowl and it's going to be 4 or 5 inches deep, I will bring the handle away and hollow out the inside just like I'm rowing a boat where I'm pulling the handle towards myself. This other technique here works on a platter because it's not hitting off the rim. But as you go deeper into a bowl, if you continue with this and you're working on the side, you're starting to pull the tool into end grain, which is in this direction. And that's where the tool could catch and catch quite badly. So I'm going to just stay doing it in this direction for the moment. But just as I said, take note, if you're not doing a lot of turning, this is not how I would do a salad bowl. So I'll show you how I do the salad bowl first. This is how I would hollow out a salad bowl. So I close the flute, get into the groove, open, and pull the tool towards myself. And I just work my way out about 2 inches, down about 2 inches, and then work my way across from that, just like this. It's really effective. Another technique then for the platter is just like this. Because you can keep the handle just by your side. Okay, let's just stop and check. Okay, we have 8.24 millimeters left at the bottom. I think 8.25. So we'll just take off a little bit more here. So what I'm going to do now is start to shape this. But what I can do, just before I start, let's use these calipers. These are called the Andre Martel calipers. That's what they look like from above. So they're not quite, they're like a distorted number 8, but what's really good about them is they actually fit down through the slot of the jaws, and this flat side here doesn't hit the base of your bladder or doesn't hit the bottom of your jaws, and then it'll go in here. So I can see exactly how much I have left there. So I'm going to take off a little bit more. I just want no more than 6 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch at the bottom when I'm finished this. And it's never a bad idea to just stop and measure. I think everybody at some point in their life has gone through the bottom of a bowl or platter. I know what it feels like. I went through the bottom of a bowl back in 1991 and I never forgot it. So it's something that does happen. During a class last year, somebody went, or the year before, somebody went through the bottom of their platter and Cornelia baked a cake in the shape of a donut. It had a hole in the center, so the platter was just perfect for that cake. So you just have to adjust the shape of your cake for those platters. So what I want to do here is start with the flute completely closed. As I mentioned earlier on, if the flute's opened a little bit, it'll skate to the left, so I'll close it, which means the flute's at 90 degrees to the rest. And as soon as I get in there, I can open. Now that cut's getting quite heavy, and I'm not worried about going through the bottom yet, but if I push through, it can pull a chunk out of the bottom. So I'm going to stop and take that in a couple of passes. Go again. We'll just stop there for a second. Now, because I've been cutting through some of the minerals here in the wood, some of the silica, I'm going to sharpen the 1/2-inch bowl gouge before I make the final cut. And so I'm going to just take that to the Tormek for a second. Let's see if I can switch over here and let you follow me to the grinder. There we go. So that's the Tormek set up with the diamond wheel. It's the extra fine diamond wheel. So the jig has already been set to number 2 setting. But what I do is to work with the sharpening charts, I color code all the tools, and I have several different jigs. They're not the cheapest, but in a classroom situation, we never have to change just setting. So students just line up the color with the tool, and everything else is pretty much straightforward after that. I set the protrusion for this tool to 65 millimeters on the Tormek. And the important thing is I go through the smaller tools that I don't turn them over too far. If you turn them over too far, the side wing starts to hollow out. So what I've done is I've turned up that little block of wood so that when I'm turning this over, it hits off that rather than the bar on the Tormek. I do that in the class, and I've sort of figured out for myself at this point. Actually, it doesn't hit off the head of the jig, it hits off the bar of the tool, I should say. So I just apply a little bit of pressure. This is, I think, a 1200 grit wheel or 1000 grit. So back and forward maybe twice. That's good enough. The other thing I'm going to do is take a little bit off the heel, slide it so I've loosened off the bottom. That's one of the nice things about the Tormek jig. You can just slide that back, which brings it up a little bit, and now it'll take material off the heel. And that will give it some clearance as it goes around that tight curve. We'll bring that back. The fine is 600 and the extra fine is, I think, 1200. So what I want to do now next is take the burr off the inside. So I'm going to just use this wheel over here. And that's got a little bit of grinding paste on it. And I'll take the burr off the flute on the inside. One of the issues with the M42 steel, because it's that little bit harder, the burr on it that's more durable doesn't tend to break away when you start turning. And so the softer steel, it's never been important to me to hone the flute on the softer steel in the past, but as soon as I started working with M42, I thought it wasn't that sharp. Then I realized that burr just stayed there even when you started to turn with it. So that's a good sharp edge now. Taking the heel off this tool here allows it to get around this tight curve without the heel leaving the tip out of the cut. Okay, so that's getting thinner, obviously. Let's do a little check with this guy first and see what we're at. And so we are about 7 millimeters or so, but we have a little more material in the center than we have here because the base, remember, is domed. And that's the good thing about the dome base is you get a little more wood there and less likely to go through. So starting with the flute completely closed, now open a little bit around that tight corner. And just the shavings were starting to stick to the top of the tool, so I just stopped. So I'm dropping the handle slightly, which helps me get around. And then pushing in towards the center. I'm just going to increase the speed a little bit, and off we go again. Okay. So I have a lot of practice making these platters, and generally straight off the bowl gouge, I can get the curve I'm looking for without using a scraper. However, if you don't have as much practice, this combination of scrapers tends to work really well for platters. It does take turning bowls for some time before you can make those cuts just in one smooth move. And if I take a break from turning, I have to get a little bit of practice in making a few pieces before I get it back again. So don't feel bad if you're sort of making stop and start motions as you try to go across something. That does take a little bit of practice. But if you give it 20, 30 years, in no time at all, you'll have it too. So what I'm going to show you now is the negative rake scraper. This is a little small 3/4 inch negative rake scraper that'll get around that tight curve there. So it's sharpened to 66 degrees here on the tip and about 66 degrees on the lower bevel and 33 on the top. And this one here will get around that tight curve quite nicely. And when that's sharpened correctly, you get these lovely, oops, drop those shavings. You get those lovely little wisps of shavings coming off it. So I'll just come around a tight corner. It's never a good idea coming back near this rim again, because even though it looks like it's running through, the chances that it's moved would be quite high. And I'd say moved, it would be slightly. And then the scraper will just start to bounce off it, and it'll leave you with more harm done than good. Now, this is not the ideal scraper to work across the center because it's got such a small radius on it, you'll end up leaving grooves in that surface. So what I want to do is move to this bigger one. This one here is about 1.5 inches or so, or 1 3/8 inch wide. You'll notice it's got 2 bevels on it as well. So the reason that that's got 2 bevels on it, it's nothing to do with the reason a bowl gouge has 2 bevels. I take the second bevel off so I can sharpen this on the Tormek when I want to. So when I sharpen this on the Tormek, it turns so slowly. If it was one long bevel, it would take forever to remove any material. So by shortening that by more than half, it's much easier to do on the Tormek. And if I'm sharpening on the Tormek, what I tend to do, let me switch the camera, I will do it from this other side. So I'll turn the Tormek around and do it from the other side so the wheel's coming towards it. So there's lots of little things that you can do so that this will sharpen all your tools. It's not the tool for reshaping, the Tormek. It's not the tool for reshaping, but it's wonderful for sharpening. So when I'm using this, again, handles underneath my arm, raised slightly, and I'm not going to use the dead center of this tool, a little to the left because it straightens out on the sides. And I'll just use my finger here on the tool rest and just slide back and forward. And at the end, I'm just dropping the handle because the tool rest is below center, and I drop the handle to get rid of that nub. But even with a negative rake scraper, if you drop the handle, you won't get a catch. So that is really it. That's the end of our platter. It just has to be oiled. But let me just check that for a second. The best way to see if there's any bumps in the bottom of your plate is to not to start from center going towards the side, is to run your fingers back and forward the whole way, because if you do that, you will feel it raising up or dropping down as you go through the center point. And it was Stuart Mortimer a long time ago told me about that, because I had a piece in the Irish Woodturners Guild exhibition, big salad bowl, and it did pretty well in the competition, but he was saying to me, it's absolutely perfect other than that little hidden bump in the center. And I said to him, there's no bump in the center. I said, I've checked it. So he brought me up to the bowl and he said, feel it. So I started there and did this. And I said, it's not there. He said, do this. And that's where I felt it. So I learned a valuable lesson that day. Never run your fingers fast across the center or you'll never be happy with anything you make. So I'm just going to put on some oil, and that's the inside then done.
There was a question about if you prefer wet sharpening or dry sharpening. Wet sharpening.
So the question came in, do I prefer wet sharpening or dry sharpening? So wet sharpening is with something like a Tormek, there's a Shepak or Rikon jet, they make a water stone. The edge that I get from the Tormek is simply superb. It's really, really good. So I really like it. But one of the most important things for me about the Tormek is that it's repeatable. It's really quick for sharpening. It's really slow for reshaping. So I do all my reshaping on this bench grinder, which is a slow speed bench grinder from Axminster in England. It's got an 80 grit here on the right-hand side for reshaping, and it's got a 360 grit on the left-hand side for sharpening. Those wheels originally made by OptiGrind from the tool post, but tool post is gone, unfortunately, and I think OptiGrind might not be there anymore. However, I do like to freehand sharpen on the 360 grit in production. So I tend to mix how I sharpen my tools. The 360 does give a pretty decent edge as well, but my freehand sharpening doesn't involve the jig, and it's something I cannot teach. Okay, so I'm just going to switch over here. I'm going to put on the oil. And do you want to read out another question while I'm doing this, Cornelia?
There's a continual conversation about why do you tighten the chuck in both holes? So there was a bit of conversation about that.
Okay, so the question that came in, why do I tighten the chuck in bowls? Why do I tighten the chuck in both keyways, each side of the chuck? That is recommended by pretty much everybody, all engineers. But personally, I don't think it offers anything. But normally when I don't do both sides, there's a 10-minute conversation of why I should have done both sides. So no matter what, I can't win. But if I'm in production, I only do one side. I feel when you go to the other side of the chuck, the only reason the chuck key turns is it's biting into the wood some more, and I would have done the same on the other side had you stayed there. So the secret for me is to get the chuck into the perfect circle, and when you open it out, the key only turns less than a quarter of a turn when the jaws are in a perfect circle, because it doesn't break into the wood. And generally, when I go to the other side of the chuck, it doesn't go any further. And but you can have 10-minute debates of why I should do it and why I shouldn't, and nobody agrees with each other in the end. So that is it. Anything else, Cornelia?
This one is, do your plates, are they good for hot or cold food?
So are the plates good or for hot or cold food? Anything. Absolutely anything. You can put stew in them, porridge in them. Remember, the Vikings were putting, everything in their bowls. In Dublin, we discover all the time, there's excavations, old bowls made by the Vikings, and they use them for everything, drinking alcohol, whatever food they were having. So the important thing is that you don't leave the food in it for long periods or overnight, so it has a chance to soak in. So I'm just going to switch over cameras there now. Give that a sand here.
This is a long question.
Okay, so there's another question coming in.
Some people say sharpening with extremely fine grits is counterproductive, that the edge gets too fragile. You sharpen to 120 grits, so clearly you disagree. What are your thoughts on this?
So I'm not sure if you heard the question, so I'll repeat it. Some people saying sharpening to an extremely fine grit leaves a very weak edge. I would disagree with that, just simply because if you sharpen your tool with a coarse wheel, I've got an 80 grit there, and if I look at that under a microscope, which I've done, what I've got is a serrated edge. And a serrated edge is fine on a steak knife because you're cutting back and forth like a handsaw, ripping the fibers that's in a steak. But when you present that cutting edge to a bowl, you have what looks like a New York cityscape. You've got high points and low points, and the low points aren't cutting. So the high points dull very quickly. So I personally feel a very fine edge stays sharper a little longer, provided you don't hit grit. And unfortunately, with the likes of this beach, it's full of grit. But when I'm working with material that doesn't contain any silica, it does stay sharp for longer. And I do feel I sand less as well. But the high-speed grinder, this one over here, which runs at I think 1800 RPM, or no, it's actually 1465 RPM, that higher speed tends to give a finer edge than the same wheel placed on the Tormek. And so a 360 to me would be coarse on a Tormek, whereas a 1200 at the slow speed gives to me a really, really good edge.
You might spell out the screws that you use. Just spell it for people. Right.
Okay, so the screws that I use, they're made by a company in Germany called Spax, S-P-A-X. And if you go onto the Axminster Power Tools website, you'll find them if you live in the UK or if you live in Ireland or Europe. But unfortunately in the USA, I'm not sure if those Home Depot, somebody might have mentioned that they might be available there. So this is a 240 grit that I'm working on now.
Tips for keeping the final cut smooth.
So tips for keeping the final cut smooth with the tool. It is all about how you stand at the lathe and how you hold the tools. I'm just going to dry my hands for a second before I pick up a tool. But I heard a saying one time from somebody, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So when I'm making cuts with the tool, I tend to move the tools quite slowly, but I make sure the work the tools are doing is quite significant, so that there's not a lot of follow-up with sandpaper and things afterwards. But typically when I'm making that cut across the bottom of the bowl, I'll stand right foot forward, handle by my side, pushing down, and I lean into the cut. But if you're standing at the lathe, just holding the tool and extending your arms away from the body, what happens is the right arm goes forward, the left one catches up, and you end up getting all these waves. So you have a lot of flexibility in your arms, but not a lot of control. The control for me is in the core of my body, and that's where I can get smooth cuts and flowing curves. But it is certainly about practice for sure. The grits on the Axminster slow speed grinder, 80 for reshaping and 360 for sharpening. If you can only afford one single CBN wheel, CBN means cubic boron nitride, then I would recommend a 180 grit. A 180 is sort of somewhere between coarse and fine. That's what I worked with for a couple of years until I got exactly the grits I wanted to work with. I do a lot of reshaping of tools here in the workshop, from tools belonging to the students to tools coming in that I may need to change the shape in them for one reason or another. And I bought a really coarse CBN wheel made for me specifically by a guy called Dietmar from OptiGrind, and the 46 grit did not work well at all in the CBN. It was really coarse, and it just left these deep tracks as it tried to cut the steel, but it didn't remove steel any faster than an 80 grit. And so I'm just going to come back here for a second.
So there was a conversation that was going on for a while then about the parabolic flute on the GL6.
Yeah.
And then there was a conversation going on about the traditional, what was called the traditional grind on the GL6. And you might want to kind of talk about that.
So Cornelia is mentioning two tools that I haven't used in the demonstration. So what I'll just show those now, and I think what we'll do is we'll go over to the Zoom. But bear with me 1 second, guys, and I'm just taking down some tools here for a second. So I'm just, as I gather a couple of tools, and in a moment we will finish the demo and we'll move over to Zoom. So the GL6 is the blue tool. So it's just a code name I've put on the tools, but this is a tool I use at the bottom of a bowl. There's no need to use it at the bottom of a platter because I have full access with my 40 45-degree grind to get across the bottom, it does a good job. But when I have to reach down inside a bowl, this one here is the one that I like to use. And it's got a more traditional grind. If I reach in there for a second, it's more of a traditional grind where the wing is not swept back anything as far as I do with the Irish grinds, but it has an incredibly short bevel. And when I'm using that tool, it is used with the flute completely open, as you see it now, cutting with just to the left of the tip, and it slices the wood really beautifully as I go across the bottom. The other thing that's unique about this tool as well is the flute is not milled back as far as it is on the other tools that I've used so far today. And that means when it's reaching across the tool rest as I get down to the bottom of the bowl, it doesn't flex in the same way a tool would if it's hollowed out the whole way down. The flutes, as we mentioned on these tools, are that parabolic flute. That is not a new flute shape, and this is an old gouge made by Robert Sorby, and that is actually a tool that was forged as opposed to being a round bar. So you can see that it's a square section. That's quite an old tool from probably the 50s or so, before high-speed steel was available to wood turners. That is also forged into a parabolic flute. So what they liked about the parabolic flute, which really is the original bowl gouge, was that you could go from a small radius on the tip, and as you rotate the tool, you rotate into a larger radius, which works really well as you get around the bottom. So the small radius as you enter the bowl, and then you rotate it and start to cut with this side almost in a vertical position to get that slicing cut as you get around the bottom. And then the old gouges were sharpened with that traditional grind. While I have this tool in my hand, I'll just mention one thing. A lot of confusion about bowl sizes, bowl gouge sizes, I should say, to correct myself. In the UK, we'll say that tool there is a 1/2-inch bowl gouge. And if I was to take a calipers, there's pretty much nothing on that measures 1/2 inch. But some people tell me it's from the inside of the flute here on one side to the outside on the other, but that does not measure 1/2 inch. So my sharpening charts, or when I'm demonstrating, I talk only about the bar diameter because that makes sense to everybody and it's easy to measure that. But in the olden days, the reason those measurements exist, where it's measuring the flute as opposed to the outside diameter, is the olden days, these tools were tapered. So that's tapered as it gets back towards the base. So no matter what you measure on that, in fact, it starts to close in slightly at the top. There's no point in measuring the outside of that because they're not uniform, whereas the flute is. And imagine that it was forged around a form or something on the inside, so the inside measurement was consistent throughout. So that's my taking on it. I could be wrong. I'll show you one more tool. This is a V-shaped gouge. So this one here, it's getting to the end of its life, but it's got two straight sides, giving it that sort of V shape and a narrow tip at the top. But if you look at what happens, a V-shaped gouge, as you try to turn it into an Irish grind, generally develops those bird's beaks at the top. And it does not have the geometry in that closed V shape to accept, in my view, an Irish grind I would want to work with. And then on the other side of things, you've got this other one here, which is a U-shaped gouge. So that's a U-shaped gouge, if I can get it to focus, with exactly the same settings that I put on my 5/8 inch bowl gouge. But again, the U-shaped gouge starts to dip, but it's far greater it's a broader dip on the sides. Let me focus on that again, just simply because of the wider area here, the larger radius at the tip. This is not a good tool to turn into an Irish grind. So if you've got a U-shaped gouge, it really only works well with a square across traditional grind for the bottom of bowls, as far as I'm concerned. So So I'm just going to take this piece off the lathe and I'll let you have a quick look, and then we will go back to Terry. So Terry, if you get yourself ready, we're going back to
I'm
you.
ready, don't worry.
Yeah. So let's take a closer look at this. So this is the finished article. It's got a nice little half beat there. This is going over to our kitchen. We never run out of the need of having more platters in our kitchen, and that's the base at the bottom. So it turned out pretty well. What I like about it is it's quite light, and because I've gone quite thin at the bottom. So I don't like picking up a piece and it feels heavier than it actually looks. And so wall thickness for me is quite important. So Terry, I'm going to hand it back to you now.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Glenn. That was fantastic. Loads of good comments coming in. I know that you can't see them. Hopefully, Cornelia will let you know how well received this demo has been.
Great.
Just the latest 2 comments. There's a great platter, awesome platter, and the quality of the whole demo and the tips and the instruction have been very, very well received. So Glenn, thank you. That's been absolutely brilliant. There's more and more and more questions coming in, so be warned. But I know that you have to get away, so you're not going to be in Zoom for too long. I think you're possibly already running a little bit behind schedule, but we'll get over into Zoom in a minute and we'll catch up with you there. So on behalf of everyone watching, because I know not everyone's going to follow us across, on behalf of everyone watching, including me, thank you so much for that demo. Absolutely fantastic.
You're very welcome.
A new high standard. So yeah, absolutely brilliant. I'll see you over in Zoom in a couple of minutes once I work out how to switch.
Can I just mention one thing? Can I have the screen back for 1 second?
You can indeed.
Yeah. So if you like what you've seen, I do have on my website DVDs, and they're available as downloads as well, so that you can be watching it in about an hour's time if you get a download. But there's about 15 downloads that you can choose from, and there are 6 DVDs that you can choose from platters to bowl turning, to the Dublin Viking bowl, sharpening, and some other titles in there as well. So thank you guys for joining in, and I hope some of you come along to Zoom. I'll be hanging around there for a little while.
And how long are the DVDs, Glenn?
The DVDs are typically a little over an hour long, and some of the downloads of the demonstrations are about an hour and a half. But the DVDs, there's a lot of time goes into editing, so you actually get a lot of close-up detail.
Yeah.
I have a great setup with cameras, so I have a love of filmmaking for a long time. So you really benefit from, with the downloads, a good high definition and close-up shots. And when we're doing the DVDs, I have the time to get the cameras right where they need to be at all times.
I've seen some of them, and the quality of them is brilliant. We spend a lot of time and effort with our YouTube videos, and yours, the quality of your stuff is what we're aspiring to. So it is absolutely super, absolutely super.
Thank you. But also have a look on my YouTube channel. There's some videos I've been putting up over the years that show projects being made with a little bit of music in the background. I don't really do many tutorials for YouTube. There's a few up there, all right. But they're more inspirational videos that I've done over the years. So check out my YouTube channel too. Glenn Lucas.
And it's all glennlucas.com, yeah?
glennlucas.com. That's it. www.glenn2ns lucas.com.
All right, and brilliant. Thank you.
That will get my website.
Fantastic. Glenn, thanks again. We'll see you over in Zoom, and I'll let you go for now. Thanks so much. It's absolutely brilliant.
Thanks, everybody.
See you soon. See you on the other side, as they say. Cheers. So that was brilliant. I loved every minute of that. That was fantastic demonstration. I hope you all enjoyed it. I'm checking some of the comments as they come in. So yeah, that was brilliant. So we're going to cross over to Zoom in a minute. Don't forget, the link is pinned at the top of the chat. So or you should have had it in an email already by now. So hopefully you know where we're going. So hope to see you over there. If you're not joining us, that's fine. Hope you enjoyed the demo, and we will see you again very soon. So just a quick reminder and a reveal to come. Next time we're on screen, question time, 22nd of January. That's Friday week. So it's not very far away now. So yeah, I love this. Hang on. There you go, just because we've got that. So yeah, come and join us for question time. Loads of questions coming in, and so if you don't get the answer you want tonight, email it into us, please. The links are all on our website. Just email us the question. It's on YouTube, it's visual, so we want to have the props ready, so when people ask questions, be prepared. Our turners can say, yeah, if you look at this is what I'm talking about with this, rather than have to go and scurry away and go through cardboard boxes trying to find the right thing. So do send the questions in first, please. The quiz on the 30th of January, as a Saturday evening, actually Saturday night sorted out. It's great fun last time. Everyone I know had an absolute blast. Even if you couldn't join in with the online scoring, it works out really well. It'll be very much the same. So yeah, just quickly scanning through the comments there. Yeah, fantastic. Glad you all enjoyed it. The Zoom link is pinned to the top of the chat. And yeah, someone recommending the DVDs, which is brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, and that's just a brilliant demo. So we will be back. Our next Conkers Live demonstration is the 4th of February, and I think someone has already given the game away as to who it's going to be. So we're really pleased to have Emma Cook coming back for us, the Tiny Turner, with a full demo for the evening. I was going to say a full 2-hour demo, but Emma doesn't seem to understand the concept of time sometimes. So who knows how long that's going to go on for. But yeah, Emma Cook with a fantastic demo. But before that, Emma's joining us for question time. And I'm pretty sure she's also going to be in the audience out there for the quiz as well. So come and see if you can do better than she does. So we'll see you over on Zoom in a minute. And been a fantastic evening. Thanks so much for joining us. See you in a minute, hopefully.